Hi, I'm Sophia. And yes, my identical twin sister Maya stole my identity and systematically destroyed my life while I was studying abroad. She emptied my bank accounts, ruined my credit score, and even got engaged to my long-term boyfriend using my name. She thought she'd gotten away with the perfect crime, but what she didn't know was that I'd been documenting everything, building a case that would not just expose her lies, but completely dismantle the new life she'd stolen from me. Stay with me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It started with a single notification. A fraud alert from my bank that pinged my phone at 3 a.m. while I was cramming for finals in my Tokyo apartment. I'd been in Japan for 8 months on a prestigious exchange program, the kind of opportunity that comes once in a lifetime. My Japanese professor had personally recommended me after seeing my dedication in his advanced language courses. I'd worked 2 jobs for 3 years to save enough money to supplement my scholarship. This was supposed to be my stepping stone to an international career. The message seemed innocent enough at first. Unusual activity detected on your account. Please verify recent transactions. Half asleep, I swiped through the alert, expecting to see some mix-up with international fees or maybe a duplicate charge from the convenience store downstairs. Instead, what I saw made my stomach drop. 5 withdrawals in Phoenix, Arizona, where I hadn't set foot in months, totaling nearly $12,000. Almost everything I had. My first thought wasn't theft or fraud, it was concern. Had someone stolen my card? Had my account been hacked? I immediately called the bank's international hotline, my hands shaking as I navigated the automated system. I'm seeing several withdrawals that I didn't authorize, I explained to the representative, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm currently in Tokyo. I haven't been in Arizona since January. There was a pause on the line. Ms. Rivers, according to our records, you verified your identity in person at our Phoenix branch 3 days ago. You presented your driver's license and answered all security questions correctly. My blood went cold. That's impossible. I'm literally on the other side of the world. Another pause. Let me check something. I heard keyboard clicks in the background. The transactions were processed using your card with the chip present, and you signed for each withdrawal. We have footage of you in the branch. It wasn't me, I insisted, my voice rising. Someone must be impersonating me. Well, the representative said slowly, the person knew your mother's maiden name, your first pet's name, and your high school mascot. They also had your ID and your signature matched our records. That's when I knew. There was only one person in the world who could pull this off perfectly. My twin sister, Maya. We'd always been identical in appearance, but polar, opposites in every other way. Where I was studious and methodical, Maya was impulsive and charismatic. I planned meticulously for the future. She lived entirely in the moment. I saved. She spent. Our parents had always praised my responsibility while making excuses for her recklessness. Maya's just more free-spirited, they'd say. She'll figure things out eventually. I'd spent years hearing variations of, why can't you be more fun like your sister? From peers, while Maya had to endure, why can't you be more focused like Sophia? From teachers. It created a strange dynamic between us, simultaneously bound by our identical DNA, yet increasingly distant as our paths diverged. When I won the study abroad scholarship, Maya had hugged me tightly at the airport. I'm proud of you, Soph, she'd said, and I'd believed her. In the months since, our communication had been sporadic. A few texts, occasional social media comments, nothing that suggested anything was wrong. Now, sitting in my tiny Tokyo apartment with my financial security evaporating before my eyes, I realized how naive I'd been. The bank representative was still talking, explaining the fraud investigation process, but my mind was racing ahead. If Maya had taken my money, what else had she done? I hung up after filing the fraud claim and immediately checked my email. Dozens of notifications I'd apparently archived without reading suddenly seemed suspicious. I restored them one by one, uncovering a horrifying pattern. Credit card applications, loan approvals, address changes, all processed in my name over the past 3 months. My hands trembled as I opened my credit monitoring app. My near-perfect score of 780 had plummeted to 5 on 20. There were 5 new credit cards, a personal loan, and even a car lease, all maxed out or in collections. Over $60,000 in debt that I'd never created. Dawn was breaking over Tokyo as the full picture came into focus. While I'd been immersing myself in Japanese culture and language, attending classes and building a future, Maya had been systematically dismantling my financial identity back home. I felt physically ill, bent over my desk, trying to breathe through the panic. I called my parents, forgetting the time difference in my distress. "Hello?" My father's voice was thick with sleep. "Dad, it's me. I need help. Someone's stolen my identity and emptied my accounts. I think it's Maya." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The silence that followed lasted too long. "Dad? Sophia, honey," he finally said, his voice cautious. "Maya said you might call with some story like this." I felt like I'd been slapped. "What?" "She told us you've been having problems. That you've been accusing her of things. She's worried about you." My mind reeled. "Dad, I'm in Tokyo. I haven't spoken to anyone about Maya. Whatever she told you is a lie." "She showed us the emails, Sophia. The threatening ones you sent her." "What emails? I haven't sent her anything." My voice cracked with frustration. I heard my mother in the background, asking questions, my father's muffled response. Then my mother was on the phone. "Sophia, we know things have been stressful. With your program," she said in that soothing tone she always used during family conflicts. "Maya told us everything, how you've been struggling, how you asked her to handle some financial matters for you, and now you're having second thoughts." "Mom, that's not true. I never asked Maya to touch my accounts. I've been managing everything myself from here." "She has the authorization forms, honey, with your signature." Ice spread through my veins. Of course she did. We'd practiced each other's signatures as teenagers, a seemingly harmless game that had now turned sinister. "They're forged," I insisted. "I need you to believe me." Another pause. "Maya said you might say that too." That's when I realized how thoroughly Maya had prepared for this moment. She hadn't just stolen my money, she'd poisoned my support system against me. She'd anticipated my every move and countered it before I even made it. "Where is she now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "She's staying in your condo. Honey, you told her she could while you were away, remember? To keep an eye on things." "My condo. The one I'd bought last year after saving for a down payment since college. The property that represented every extra shift I'd worked, every vacation I'd skipped, every indulgence I'd denied myself." "I need to come home," I said firmly. "Is that wise? What about your program?" "Mom, I've been robbed. By my own sister. I need to come home and fix this." "I think you should talk to someone there first," my mother suggested gently. "Maya mentioned your program has counseling services. Maybe this is all just a misunderstanding." They didn't believe me. My own parents didn't believe me. The realization was like a physical weight on my chest. After hanging up, I sat motionless, watching the morning light change over the Tokyo skyline. The city was waking up, millions of people starting their day while my life imploded in slow motion. I needed to think clearly, to make a plan. Maya had prepared for my panic, my accusations, my desperate calls for help. She'd anticipated the obvious moves. so I needed to be less obvious. I opened my laptop and began methodically documenting everything. Bank statements, credit reports, timestamps of calls. I took screenshots of my location data showing I'd been in Tokyo continuously for months. I pulled up my passport entry stamps, my class attendance records, my transportation card history, anything that proved I physically couldn't have been in Arizona doing what the records claimed I'd done. Next, I called my university advisor in Tokyo and explained the situation. Professor Tanaka listened without interruption, then said simply, "What do you need?" "A letter confirming my continuous presence in the program. Security footage from the dormitory showing I've been here. Anything that officially documents my whereabouts." "I'll have it all ready this afternoon," she promised. "And Sophia, this is not your fault." Those 5 words nearly broke me. After my own parents' doubt, having someone believe me felt like oxygen when I'd been drowning. I spent the next 4 hours contacting every financial institution where fraudulent accounts had been opened. Some were helpful. Others insisted I needed to appear in person. I filed police reports both with Tokyo authorities and with the Phoenix PD, careful to emphasize that this was a case of twin impersonation, not simple identity theft. By afternoon, I'd maxed out my Japanese credit card booking an emergency flight home. It would drain the last of my accessible funds, but I had no choice. This wasn't something I could fix from 6,000 miles away. As I packed my bags, my phone buzzed with a text. "Unknown number. I know what you're doing. Don't come home. There's nothing left of your life here anyway." My hands froze over my suitcase. Maya. It had to be. Another text followed. "BTW. Ethan says hi." Or should I say, "My fiancé says hi." Ethan. My boyfriend of 3 years. The man who'd promised to wait for me, who'd visited twice since I'd been in Japan. We'd last video called just 2 weeks ago, discussing plans for when I returned. With shaking fingers, I opened Instagram. I hadn't checked social media in days, too focused on my studies. There it was, posted yesterday. A photo of Ethan down on one knee, holding a ring up to me. Except it wasn't me. It was Maya, wearing my favorite dress, her hair styled exactly like mine, accepting a proposal from the man I loved. The caption read, "She said, yes. Can't wait to spend forever with this incredible woman who stole my heart. Engaged, future Mrs. Haywood." Comments flooded the post. Congratulations from our mutual friends, my college roommates, even my extended family members. Everyone believed it was me. I sank to the floor of my small apartment, phone clutched in my hand, a strange calm replacing the panic. This wasn't just identity theft anymore. This was identity replacement. Maya wasn't just stealing my money. She was stealing my entire life. My home, my relationship, my reputation. She was methodically erasing me and inserting herself in my place. And she'd been planning it for months, maybe longer. I thought back to our last few interactions before I left for Japan. The unusual interest she'd taken in my finances, the questions about my relationship with Ethan, her surprising support for my study abroad plans. "A whole year in Japan? That's perfect for you, Soph. You should absolutely go." Of course she'd wanted me gone. She'd needed me out of the way. I picked up my phone again and started scrolling through more social media posts. There she was, at my favorite restaurant with my friends. There she was wearing my clothes at a work function with my colleagues. There she was getting a promotion at my company, a promotion I'd been working toward for 2 years. Each image hit like a physical blow. She hadn't just stolen my money or my boyfriend, she'd hijacked my entire existence. I closed my eyes, breathing deeply, forcing myself to think beyond the betrayal and shock. Maya might have anticipated my initial reactions, but she'd made one critical mistake. She thought distance and preparation would be enough to stop me. She didn't realize that the methodical, detail-oriented nature she'd always mocked was exactly what would undo her. I reopened my laptop and started a new document. At the top, I typed, Evidence Collection and Recovery Strategy. Below that, I wrote, Phase 1, Documentation. Over the next 4 hours, I created the most detailed record of my life imaginable. Every transaction, every communication, every legal document dating back 3 years. I marked the precise date when anomalies began appearing, 3 weeks after I'd arrived in Tokyo. I created a timeline of Maya's actions, correlating them with my provable whereabouts. Next came Phase 2, Alliance Building. I made a list of people I could trust implicitly, people Maya couldn't have reached or wouldn't have bothered with. My academic advisor from undergrad, my childhood friend who'd moved to Europe years ago, a cousin who'd always been able to tell Maya and me apart, even when our parents couldn't. By the time my flight was boarding the next evening, I had the skeleton of a plan. It wouldn't be fast, and it wouldn't be easy, but it would be thorough. Maya had spent months stealing my identity piece by piece. I would spend however long it took reclaiming it, and making sure she could never do this to me or anyone else again. As the plane lifted off from Tokyo, I looked out at the fading lights of the city that had become my second home. I'd come to Japan to build my future. Now I was returning to America to salvage what remained of it. The 13-hour flight gave me time to refine my strategy. Maya expected me to come home emotional, desperate, and reactive. She'd be prepared for me to go straight to our parents or to Ethan, to make accusations without proof, to act out of hurt and betrayal. So I would do none of those things. Instead, I'd be the shadow she didn't see coming. I'd gather evidence methodically, build my case irrefutably, and strike only when I could win completely. Maya had always underestimated my resolve, mistaking my quietness for weakness. She was about to learn how wrong she'd been. When the plane touched down in Phoenix, I didn't call anyone to pick me up. I didn't announce my return on social media. I took a taxi to a budget hotel near the airport, paid in cash from the emergency funds I'd kept hidden in my luggage, and checked in under a variation of my middle name. Then I slept for 10 straight hours, the first real rest I'd had since discovering the theft. I woke up clear-headed and focused. Phase 3 of my plan was about to begin, reconnaissance and evidence gathering. Maya thought she'd stolen my identity, but she'd really only taken the surface elements, my financial accounts, my social profiles, my apartment keys. She couldn't steal what made me who I was, my methodical nature, my attention to detail, my capacity for strategic thinking. These were the tools I would use to dismantle her scheme piece by piece. And unlike Maya, I wasn't looking for a quick victory. I was playing for complete restoration, and yes, if I was honest with myself, for justice that would ensure she could never harm me or anyone else this way again. The hotel room became my command center. I covered one wall with a timeline of Maya's actions, another with my counter-strategy. I used my laptop to start monitoring social media without engaging, creating alerts for any mention of my name or Maya's. I needed to understand exactly how deep her deception went before I made my first move. What I discovered over the next 48 hours left me breathless. Maya hadn't just been pretending to be me in isolated incidents. She'd constructed an entire alternate reality where she was Sophia Rivers, responsible twin, dedicated professional, now engaged woman building a perfect life in Phoenix. Meanwhile, according to the narrative she'd crafted, I was having a mental health crisis in Japan, making wild accusations, threatening her, and becoming increasingly unstable. She'd even created a fake email account in my name, sending herself disturbing messages that she'd then shared with friends and family as evidence of my breakdown. The depth of the deception was staggering. This wasn't an impulsive identity theft. This was a calculated campaign to replace me in my own life, while simultaneously destroying my credibility so thoroughly that no one would believe me when I tried to reclaim it. But Maya had made one crucial mistake. She'd gotten so comfortable in her performance that she'd grown sloppy with the details. The real me, the one who triple-checked facts and maintained meticulous records, would never have made such errors. And that's exactly how I would take back my life, one overlooked detail at a time. My first strategic move wasn't to confront Maya directly. That's what she expected. Me bursting in, emotional and accusatory, easy to dismiss as unstable. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my paper trail. The identity she'd stolen was documented, and documentation could be verified and restored. I started with the bank where the initial withdrawals had happened. Armed with my passport, Japanese residence card, university enrollment verification, and Tokyo police report, I approached the branch manager rather than a regular teller. "I need to speak with you privately about an identity theft situation," I said quietly, my tone professional rather than panicked. "It involves my identical twin sister impersonating me." The manager, a woman named Diane with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, studied my documents carefully. "This is unusual," she admitted, looking from my passport photo to my face. "Twins using family resemblance for fraud isn't something we encounter often." "I understand," I replied. "That's why I've brought extensive documentation proving I was physically in Japan when the withdrawals occurred in Phoenix." I opened my laptop and pulled up a folder containing my time-stamped university access card logs, subway pass usage records, and dormitory security footage, all showing me in Tokyo during the exact days when I had supposedly been emptying my accounts in Arizona. Diane's expression shifted from skepticism to concern. "Have you filed reports with the authorities?" "Police reports in both Tokyo and Phoenix, identity theft reports with the FTC, and fraud alerts with all 3 credit bureaus," I confirmed, sliding the documentation across her desk. "I've also submitted sworn affidavits to the credit agencies, confirming these accounts were opened fraudulently." My methodical approach caught her attention. This wasn't the behavior of someone making false accusations. This was someone who had done their homework. "Let me pull the security footage from the withdrawals," she said, typing quickly on her computer. "If what you're saying is true, we should be able to see who actually made these transactions." 20 minutes later, we were reviewing footage showing Maya, dressed like me, hair styled like mine, even carrying a bag I'd left behind, calmly withdrawing thousands from my accounts. The resemblance was uncanny, but to the trained eye, there were differences. Maya's confident posture and slight smirk were nothing like my more reserved demeanor. Diane looked up at me. "I've seen enough. This is clearly not you on the footage. We'll reverse these transactions immediately and flag your accounts for enhanced security protocols." She paused. "And we'll be turning this evidence over to law enforcement. This is felony fraud." I nodded, feeling the first small victory. "Thank you. I appreciate your thoroughness." "Most fraud victims come in emotional, understandably so," she observed. "Your systematic approach is impressive." "When someone takes everything from you," I said quietly, "you learn quickly that emotion might fuel you, but strategy is what gets results." By the end of that first day, I'd successfully disputed the fraudulent withdrawals and had the bank's security footage as evidence. It was a start, but only that. Maya had spent months building her deception. Dismantling, it would take more than one productive meeting. Next, I needed to establish a secure base of operations. The hotel was fine for short term, but I needed somewhere Maya wouldn't think to look for me. Somewhere I could work without fear of discovery. I contacted Professor Harriet Walker, my undergraduate mentor who'd retired to Scottsdale 2 years earlier. She'd always been able to tell Maya and me apart, even claiming our energetic signatures were completely different. I'd kept in touch with her during my time in Japan, sending genuine emails about my experiences that Maya wouldn't have known about. "Sophia," she said warmly when she answered my call, What a lovely surprise. How's Tokyo treating you? Actually, I'm back in Phoenix, I replied, and I'm in trouble, the kind that requires discretion and a temporary safe harbor. There was a pause. Does this have anything to do with the engagement announcement I saw? Because I've been meaning to call you about that. The woman in that photo may look like you, but her eyes tell a different story. Relief washed over me. Of course, Harriet had seen through the deception. You're the first person who's noticed, I said, my voice catching. It's Maya. She's stolen my identity, my money, my apartment, everything. She's even engaged to Ethan now, pretending to be me. Good Lord, Harriet breathed. That's diabolical. I need a place to stay while I sort this out. Somewhere Maya won't think to look. My guest house is yours for as long as you need it, she said without hesitation. When can I expect you? 3 hours later, I was settled into Harriet's desert guest house, a small but comfortable space with its own entrance and a view of Camelback Mountain. The physical distance from Maya's machinations gave me room to breathe and plan my next moves. You'll need legal representation, Harriet advised over dinner that evening. Identity theft is one thing, but what Maya has done goes beyond that. This is a calculated campaign of impersonation and fraud. I've thought about that, I admitted, but most of my money is gone, and my credit is destroyed. How do I hire a lawyer? Harriet smiled slightly. As it happens, my nephew Daniel is a partner at Bryce Walker & Tennant. They handle complex fraud cases, and he owes me several favors. Let me make a call. The next morning, I was sitting in the sleek downtown offices of BWT Law, explaining my situation to Daniel Walker. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s, but his attentive focus and rapid-fire questions revealed a sharp legal mind. This is an unusual case, he said when I'd finished my overview. Twin identity theft creates complexities that standard fraud protocols don't adequately address. But that doesn't mean we can't build a compelling case. What do I need to prove? 3 things, he replied, counting off on his fingers. 1, that you are who you say you are. 2, that you did not authorize any of these transactions or actions. 3, that your sister knowingly and intentionally impersonated you for financial gain and other benefits. I can prove all of that, I said confidently. I have documentation placing me in Japan during the fraudulent activities, testimony from professors and classmates, and now bank security footage showing Maya impersonating me. Daniel nodded approvingly. Good start, but we'll need more, especially regarding the broader identity assumption. The relationship with your boyfriend, the job promotion, the social integration. That's where this case gets particularly interesting from a legal standpoint. Interesting isn't the word I'd use, I said dryly. He had the grace to look chagrined. Of course. I apologize for the clinical perspective. This is your life we're talking about. We spent the next 2 hours outlining a comprehensive legal strategy. Daniel would file emergency motions to freeze any further financial activities in my name, while simultaneously preparing cease and desist orders regarding Maya's impersonation. Meanwhile, I would continue gathering evidence and building a network of witnesses who could verify the timeline and details of the fraud. What about Ethan? I asked finally, the question I'd been avoiding. My boyfriend, or ex-boyfriend now, I suppose. He's engaged to Maya, thinking she's me. Daniel's expression softened slightly. That's complicated. Legally speaking, he's a victim of fraud as well. But personally, he trailed off. Personally, he should have known it wasn't me, I finished. We were together for 3 years. How could he not tell the difference? That's something only he can answer, Daniel replied. For now, I'd advise against contacting him directly. Any confrontation could alert Maya that you're building a case. Let's secure the legal groundwork first. I nodded, pushing down the hurt and betrayal that threatened to overwhelm my strategic focus. Ethan would have to wait. First, I needed to reclaim my basic identity and security. Over the next week, I established a careful routine. During the day, I worked methodically through my recovery plan, disputing fraudulent accounts, gathering statements, building a chronology of Maya's actions, and identifying potential witnesses. In the evenings, I debriefed with Harriet, whose sharp insights often helped me see angles I'd missed. I maintained strict privacy protocols. I used only cash, kept my phone turned off except for necessary calls, and wore disguises when venturing. Into public, baseball caps, sunglasses, clothes that were nothing like my usual style. Phoenix was a large city, but I couldn't risk Maya spotting me before I was ready to make my move. Through careful social media monitoring, I tracked Maya's continuing performance as me. She'd taken medical leave from my job, citing stress, a convenient explanation for any behavioral differences colleagues might notice. She and Ethan were planning a small engagement party at my apartment the following weekend. My friends, people who had known me for years, were all delightedly participating in the celebration, none the wiser that they were celebrating an imposter. The most painful discovery came when I found messages between Maya and our parents. She'd convinced them I was having a psychological break in Japan, feeding them manipulated screenshots of concerning behavior and erratic messages, supposedly from me. They were actively helping her manage my finances and medical decisions, believing they were protecting me from myself. My own parents had been turned against me so thoroughly that they were now Maya's unwitting accomplices. The betrayal cut deep, but I forced myself to view it clinically. They were victims too, manipulated by Maya's elaborate deception. Their misguided actions came from concern, not malice. 10 days into my investigation, I had my first major breakthrough. Through careful analysis of Maya's social media activity as me, I discovered she'd made a critical error. In a post about my promotion, she'd tagged the location of my company's satellite office in Tempe, rather than the main Phoenix location where I actually worked. It was a small detail most people wouldn't notice, but it revealed that despite her meticulous planning, she didn't know everything about my life. This discovery led me to Jessica, my work colleague who'd always kept a professional distance from my personal life, making her someone Maya likely wouldn't have cultivated. I reached out through her professional email rather than personal channels, requesting an urgent private meeting. We met in a quiet cafe in a part of town far from my usual haunts. Jessica's eyes widened when she saw me walk in. "But I just saw you yesterday at the office," she stammered. "No," I corrected gently. "You saw my twin sister Maya pretending to be me. I've been in Japan until very recently." Jessica's confusion quickly turned to shock as I laid out the evidence. My passport stamps, university documentation, the police reports, and most convincingly, dated photos of me in Tokyo during times when she'd seen me in the office. I knew something was off, she admitted finally. She has been different. More outgoing, less detail-oriented. Reports that usually took you days to perfect were being submitted with errors. When I mentioned it, she laughed it off and said she was trying to be less uptight these days. "That sounds like Maya," I said. "She's always thought my thoroughness was a weakness rather than a strength." So, all this time, the promotion, the engagement, that wasn't you? None of it was me. Maya has stolen my identity and is systematically taking over my life while destroying my reputation and financial stability. Jessica shook her head in disbelief. That's monstrous. What can I do to help?" "I need a witness who can testify to the behavioral differences and timeline. Someone who can confirm to authorities that the person claiming to be Sophia Rivers at work is demonstrably not the same person they've worked with for years." By the end of our meeting, Jessica had agreed to provide a sworn statement and to discreetly gather evidence of Maya's workplace impersonation without tipping her off. It was another piece of the puzzle falling into place. 3 more days of methodical work yielded additional allies. My former neighbor who had moved away 6 months ago but remembered me clearly. A professor from my undergraduate program who could attest to differences in writing style between genuine emails from me in Japan and fraudulent ones sent after Maya took over my accounts. My doctor, who noted discrepancies in recent medical visits compared to my established history. Piece by piece, I was building an irrefutable case, not just of identity theft, but of a comprehensive campaign to literally replace me in my own life. 17 days after my return to Phoenix, Daniel called with news. "We've got the emergency injunctions," he announced. "All financial activities in your name are frozen, and we've secured court orders for the preservation of evidence from the bank, credit card companies, and your employer. Maya won't be able to access any more of your accounts or take further actions in your name." "What about the engagement?" I asked, thinking of the party scheduled for the coming weekend. "That's trickier," Daniel admitted. "Legally, there's no binding contract yet, so there's nothing to officially cease and desist. But the freezing of your accounts will be the first sign to Maya that her scheme is unraveling. She'll know someone's onto her." "Good," I said firmly. "Let her worry. Let her wonder. She's had months of playing me. I want her to experience what it feels like to know someone is methodically dismantling your life." Daniel was silent for a moment. "This isn't just about recovery for you, is it? This is about justice." "Recovery and justice aren't mutually exclusive," I replied. "I want my life back, yes. But I also want Maya to face consequences for what she's done, not just to me, but to everyone she's deceived. Our parents, my friends, Ethan." I paused. "She hasn't just stolen from me. She's manipulated dozens of people I care about." "I understand," he said quietly. "And for what it's worth, I think you're handling this with remarkable composure. Most people in your situation would have snapped by now." I thought about that after we hung up. Had I remained composed? Outwardly, perhaps. I'd maintained the methodical, strategic approach that had always defined me. But inside, there was a storm of emotions I rarely allowed myself to acknowledge. Rage at Maya's betrayal, hurt at my parents' doubt, heartbreak over Ethan's inability to recognize the difference between his girlfriend of 3 years and her twin. That night, alone in Harriet's guest house, I finally let myself feel it all. I cried until my throat was raw, screamed into pillows, wrote furious letters I would never send. I gave myself one night to experience the full magnitude of the pain Maya had caused. In the morning, I washed my face, made a cup of strong coffee, and returned to my command center with renewed focus. The emotional release hadn't weakened my resolve, it had clarified it. This wasn't just about recovering what was mine anymore. This was about ensuring Maya could never do this to anyone else again. The financial freeze hit 2 days later. I knew the exact moment Maya discovered it, because every one of my compromised accounts registered login attempts within minutes of each other. Frantic efforts to access money that was no longer available to her. Then came the barrage of messages to the email accounts she controlled, demanding explanations from credit card companies and banks. I watched it all unfold through the monitoring systems Daniel had helped me set up, a digital window into Maya's panic. She didn't know yet that it was me. She likely assumed it was automated fraud detection finally catching up to her activities. That ambiguity was strategic. I wanted her off balance, unsure of what was happening or who was behind it. The real turning point came the following day when Jessica implemented our workplace strategy. During a team meeting, she deliberately brought up a complex project I had led the previous year, one that involved intricate details Maya couldn't possibly know. "Sophia, could you walk us through how you structured the Nielsen analysis again? I'm trying to replicate that approach for the new client." According to Jessica's report, Maya froze momentarily before recovering with a vague answer about innovative methodologies and thinking outside the box, buzzwords that said nothing of substance. When pressed for specifics, she grew defensive and changed the subject. Everyone's been saying I need to delegate more, she deflected. So who wants to take point on rebuilding that framework? I'll supervise. The seeds of doubt had been planted. Jessica noted several colleagues exchanging confused glances. Maya might look like me, but she couldn't replicate the knowledge and expertise I'd built over years. The cracks in her performance were beginning to show. That evening, as I reviewed Jessica's account of the meeting, I received an unexpected call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. Hello? There was a long pause, then a shaky breath. Sophia? Is that really you? My heart stopped. It was Ethan. Yes, I answered, my voice steadier than I expected. It's me, the real me. The line went quiet for so long I thought he might have hung up. Then I heard a muffled sound, something between a gasp and a sob. I knew it, Ethan finally said. Something felt wrong, but everyone said I was imagining things. That you were just different after Japan, more spontaneous, less cautious. His voice hardened. They said it was a good thing. My grip tightened on the phone. How did you find me? Jessica, he admitted. She pulled me aside after the meeting today and showed me your passport stamps, the Tokyo documentation. She said I needed to know the truth before Saturday. Saturday, the engagement party. My stomach twisted at the reminder. I didn't want to believe her at first, Ethan continued. But then she asked me questions only the real you would know. Things about us that weren't on social media or told to friends. Private moments. His voice cracked. I couldn't understand how I'd gotten it so wrong. How I couldn't tell the difference between you and her. I closed my eyes, absorbing the pain in his voice. For 3 weeks, I'd been imagining this. Conversation, rehearsing accusations, demanding explanations for how he could have been so easily fooled. But now, hearing his genuine distress, I felt my anger giving way to something more complicated. Maya and I are identical, I said finally, and she's had a lifetime to study me, to practice being me when it suited her. She knew exactly how to make the differences seem like growth rather than deception. But I should have known, he insisted. 3 years together, and I didn't recognize that the woman I proposed to wasn't the woman I fell in love with. What does that say about me? About us? It was the question I'd been avoiding since discovering the engagement. Not just how he could have been fooled, but what his inability to recognize the deception revealed about our relationship. I don't know, I answered honestly. I'm still trying to understand it myself. Where are you? He asked. Can I see you? I need to see you. I hesitated. Meeting Ethan wasn't part of my careful plan. It introduced variables, emotions that could cloud my strategic thinking. But I also knew that seeing him, looking into his eyes as he saw the real me, might answer questions that words alone couldn't resolve. Tomorrow, I decided. Not at my apartment or anywhere Maya might expect. There's a coffee shop on the university campus called Copper State Brew. Noon. I'll be there, he promised. And Sophia, I'm so sorry. After we hung up, I sat motionless, trying to process this unexpected development. Ethan knew. The carefully constructed timeline I'd planned was accelerating. Once he saw me, there would be no containing the truth. Maya would know I was back and fighting to reclaim my life. I called Daniel immediately. We need to move faster, I explained. The containment is breaking down. Ethan knows, which means Maya will soon know. Actually, this might work in our favor, Daniel mused. We've gathered substantial evidence. Already. What we need now is Maya's reaction, preferably something that demonstrates consciousness of guilt. You want to use me as bait, I realized. Not exactly. But if Maya knows you're back and actively reclaiming your identity, she'll likely take action to either cover her tracks or discredit you further. Either way, she'll be operating from panic rather than calculated planning. People make mistakes when they're panicking. He was right. Maya's strength had always been her bold improvisation, but it was also her weakness. When pressured, she took risks, made impulsive decisions that often backfired. If I could provoke that impulsivity while maintaining my methodical approach, I might accelerate her undoing. Let's do it, I decided. But I want protection measures in place. Once Maya knows I'm building a case against her, there's no telling how she'll react. The next morning, I prepared carefully for my meeting with Ethan. I chose clothes that were distinctly my style, classic, understated, nothing like the trendier looks Maya had adopted while pretending to be me. I styled my hair the way I always had, before Maya had started straightening my hair for a sleeker look. Daniel arranged for a private investigator to monitor the meeting from a distance, both for my protection and to document any potential interference from Maya. I arrived early, selecting a table with clear sightlines to all entrances but partially screened by a large planter for privacy. Ethan arrived exactly at noon, his familiar punctuality a small comfort in the chaos my life had become. He scanned the room, gaze passing over me once before snapping back, his eyes widening in recognition. The moment he truly saw me, not my physical appearance, which Maya could duplicate, but me, was written across his face. A complex emotion somewhere between relief, shock, and devastating realization. Sophia, he breathed, approaching slowly, like I might vanish if he moved too quickly. I stood, maintaining a careful distance. Hello, Ethan. He studied me intently, taking in details Maya couldn't have known to replicate. The small scar near my eyebrow from a childhood fall, the way I tucked my hair behind my right ear when nervous, the specific shade of navy blue I favored that Maya always found too conservative. It really is you, he said, voice thick with emotion. God, how did I not see it? The differences seem so obvious now. Sit down, I suggested gently. We have a lot to talk about. For the next hour, I laid out the full extent of Maya's deception, the identity theft, the financial fraud, the systematic replacement of me in my own life. I showed him the documentation I'd gathered, the timeline of events, the evidence of Maya's calculated impersonation. Ethan listened in stunned silence, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief or covering his face with his hands. When I finished, he looked utterly devastated. The proposal, he said hoarsely. She manipulated everything, created situations. That seemed spontaneous, but were actually carefully staged. Kept pushing for a quick engagement, saying life was too short to wait. He met my eyes directly. I thought it was you having this amazing personal growth in Japan, coming back more confident and decisive. I was so proud of how you'd changed. The irony wasn't lost on me. Maya has always been the spontaneous twin, the decisive one, the one who takes what she wants without overthinking the consequences. I proposed to the traits I thought you'd developed, he admitted, not realizing they belonged to someone else entirely. He reached for my hand across the table. The woman I fell in love with, the real you, was thoughtful and deliberate and amazingly detail-oriented. I missed those qualities, but everyone told me people change during transformative experiences abroad. I allowed his hand to rest on mine for a moment before gently withdrawing it. We can't go back to how things were, Ethan. Too much has happened. I know, he said quietly. I just need you to know I never would have knowingly betrayed you. I thought she was you. That doesn't excuse my blindness, but it's the truth. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from the private investigator. Subject approaching cafe. ETA 2 minutes. Maya. She must have followed Ethan or tracked his phone. My pulse quickened. She's coming, I told Ethan, showing him the message. Maya's on her way here right now. His eyes widened. What do we do? In that moment, I made a critical decision. For weeks, I'd been operating from the shadows, gathering evidence methodically while staying hidden. But maybe Daniel was right. Maybe it was time to force Maya's hand, to make her confront what she'd done in a public setting where her reaction would be witnessed and documented. We stay, I said firmly. And we finish this conversation with her present. The cafe door swung open, and there she was, my mirror image, dressed in clothes from my closet, wearing my favorite perfume. For a surreal moment, it was like looking at an alternate version of myself, one who had taken all the paths I hadn't chosen. Maya froze when she spotted us, her expression cycling rapidly through shock, disbelief, and calculation. Then, remarkably, she smiled, that dazzling, charismatic smile that had always opened doors for her while I worked to earn my way through them. "Well," she said, approaching our table with practiced casualness, "this is awkward." "Awkward," I repeated flatly. "That's what you call stealing my identity? Emptying my bank accounts and getting engaged to my boyfriend?" "Awkward." Maya glanced around the cafe, noting the curious looks from nearby tables. She lowered her voice. "Let's not make a scene, Soph. We can talk about this privately." "Like how you privately stole my life," I challenged, maintaining a calm tone that contrasted with my accusatory words. "No, I think we'll have this conversation right here, with witnesses." Ethan stood abruptly. "How could you do this, Maya? To your own sister?" Maya's mask slipped for just a second, irritation flashing across her features before she composed herself again. "Ethan, honey, you're confused. Sophia's been having some issues since Japan. Mom and Dad are really worried about her." She reached for his arm. "Let's go home and talk about this rationally." He jerked away from her touch like it burned. "Stop. Just stop. I know the truth now. All of it." "What truth?" she demanded, her voice taking on an edge. "That Sophia's always been jealous of me? That she can't stand seeing me happy for once?" I remained seated, watching her performance disintegrate in real time. This was Maya's pattern. When cornered, she attacked, trying to reframe herself as the victim. It had worked our entire lives, but not this time. "The bank footage was quite clear," I said evenly. "As were the credit card applications with my forged signatures, and the suspicious timing of my personality change that precisely coincided with your disappearance from your previous life." I tilted my head slightly. "Did you really think I wouldn't fight back? That I'd just accept being erased?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Maya's face. "You can't prove anything." "Actually," came a voice from behind her, "she already has." Maya whirled to find Daniel standing there, holding a leather portfolio. Beside him was Detective Reyes from the Phoenix Police Department's Fraud Division, whom I'd been working with since my return. "Maya Rivers?" the detective asked, though it was clearly rhetorical. "We'd like to ask you some questions regarding multiple instances of identity theft, financial fraud, and criminal impersonation." The color drained from Maya's face. Her gaze darted between the detective, Daniel, Ethan, and me, calculating exits, excuses, escapes. I could practically see her mind racing, searching for the performance that would get her out of this situation. "This is ridiculous," she tried, summoning indignation. "I'm Sophia Rivers. This woman is my mentally unstable twin who's been threatening me for months because she's jealous of my life." Detective Reyes remained impassive. "We have substantial evidence indicating otherwise, including international travel records, banking security footage, and sworn statements from multiple witnesses who can distinguish between you and your sister. Based on behavior, knowledge, and expertise. Maya's facade began to crack. You don't understand. She abandoned everything, her job, her boyfriend, her responsibilities. She left it all behind. What was I supposed to do? Just let it all fall apart? So you admit to assuming her identity? The detective pressed. I was protecting her life until she came back, Maya insisted, desperation creeping into her voice. I was keeping things running. Yes, I used some of her money, but I was going to pay it back once I got the promotion. It wasn't theft. It was borrowing. Each word dug her deeper into self-incrimination. I sat silently, watching the elaborate deception she'd constructed collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. And the engagement to her boyfriend? Daniel asked pointedly. Was that also protecting her life? Maya faltered, glancing at Ethan, who stared back with cold fury. That evolved naturally. He was lonely. I was there. We connected. While you were pretending to be me? I finally interjected. That's not connection, Maya. That's manipulation and fraud. The detective stepped forward. Ms. Rivers, we'd like you to come to the station to make a formal statement. You're not under arrest at this time, but I should advise you that you have the right to remain silent and the right to an attorney. Maya looked at me then, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. Gone was the charismatic performer, the confident impersonator. In her place stood my twin, suddenly vulnerable and afraid. Sophia, she said quietly, you don't have to do this. We're sisters. We can work this out between us. The appeal might have worked once. Throughout our lives, I'd been the one to cover for Maya's mistakes, to clean up her messes, to forgive her transgressions because that's what family did. I'd accepted the smaller role, the lesser consideration, the background position to her spotlight. But not anymore. You stopped treating me like a sister the moment you decided to steal my identity, I replied, my voice steady. And you'll face the consequences of that decision like anyone else would. As Detective Reyes led Maya away, she looked back once, her expression a complex mixture of anger, fear, and something else. Perhaps the first glimmer of understanding that her actions had finally caught up with her. The cafe had gone silent, witnesses to the dramatic confrontation watching in stunned fascination. Ethan sank back into his chair, looking shell-shocked. Daniel placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. You did well, he said. That couldn't have been easy. Actually, I replied, surprising myself with the realization. It was. For the first time in my life, I didn't back down from Maya. I didn't accommodate her narrative or sacrifice my truth to keep the peace. I took a deep breath. It feels like freedom. In the days that followed, the full extent of Maya's deception continued to unravel. She was charged with multiple felonies related to identity theft, fraud, and financial crimes. My parents, finally confronted with irrefutable evidence of her manipulation, were devastated, both by what she had done and by their own unwitting role in enabling her. We should have known, my mother wept during our first conversation after Maya's arrest. We should have questioned more, looked deeper. I'm so sorry, Sophia. Their apologies were sincere, but couldn't immediately heal the wound of their doubt. Rebuilding trust would take time I was willing to invest, but not at the expense of my own boundaries and self-respect. The recovery process was complex and often exhausting. Each fraudulent account had to be disputed, each stolen dollar traced and reclaimed, each relationship damaged by Maya's impersonation carefully evaluated and, where possible, repaired. Some friends were mortified by their inability to distinguish the real me from Maya's performance. Others were defensive, insisting I had indeed changed and they'd simply accepted my new personality. Ethan and I met several more times, attempting to process what had happened and what it meant for us. The engagement to Maya had inflicted a wound that couldn't be simply bandaged over with explanations or apologies. "I want to try again," he said during our fourth post-revelation conversation. "Now that I know what happened, we could start fresh." I studied him across the table, this man I had loved for 3 years, who had proposed marriage to someone he thought was me but wasn't. Could we, though? Could you look at me without seeing her? Without wondering if you preferred some aspects of her version of me? Without questioning your own perceptions? His silence was answer enough. "I think we both need time," I said gently. "Time to understand what happened and what it reveals about ourselves and our relationship." We parted with no promises but mutual respect, a clean break that honored what we had shared without forcing a reconciliation that neither of us was ready for. As for my career, Jessica's testimony and the legal documentation of Maya's fraud had protected my professional reputation. My company placed me on paid administrative leave while I sorted out the personal and legal aftermath, with assurances that my position, my real position, not the one Maya had manipulated her way into, would be waiting when I was ready to return. 3 months after the confrontation at the cafe, I sat in the courtroom as Maya accepted a plea deal. The prosecuting attorney had built an airtight case, using the evidence I'd methodically gathered to establish a pattern of deliberate, calculated fraud. Facing potential decades in prison if convicted at trial, Maya agreed to plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for a 5-year sentence and full restitution. Before the judge accepted the plea, Maya was given an opportunity to address the court. She turned toward me, our identical features reflecting different lives, different choices, different consequences. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said, her voice stripped of its usual performance quality. "It started as just borrowing some money, using your accounts when mine were overdrawn. But then, it was so easy to be you. People respected you. They trusted you. Doors opened for you that had always been slammed in my face." She paused. "I told myself I was just borrowing your life for a while, that you'd never even know. But that was a lie I told myself to justify what I was doing." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was perhaps the most honest Maya had ever been with me, or with herself. As the bailiff led her away to begin her sentence, I didn't feel the vindication I'd expected. Instead, I felt a complicated mixture of sadness for what might have been between us as sisters, relief that the ordeal was ending, and most surprisingly, a profound sense of my own strength. Maya had taken everything from me: my money, my home, my relationship, my reputation, and I had methodically, relentlessly rebuilt it all from nothing. Not by mimicking her bold dramatics or charismatic performances, but by leaning into the very qualities she had always mocked: my attention to detail, my patience, my thoroughness, my strategic thinking. The traits she had seen as weaknesses had become my greatest strengths. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited with questions about the sensational twin identity theft case. I answered a few briefly, then declined further comment. This story, my story, wasn't meant for public consumption or entertainment. It was a painful chapter that was finally closing, making way for whatever came next. That evening, I sat on the porch of my newly purchased home, not the condo Maya had taken over, but a small craftsman bungalow with a garden and privacy, bought with the insurance settlements and restored savings. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, far from the trendy district where my old apartment stood. My phone buzzed with a text from Harriet. "Proud of you. Remember, resilience isn't just about surviving what happens to you. It's about choosing who you become because of it." As twilight settled over my new beginning, I reflected on that wisdom. Maya had chosen to become someone else rather than face her own challenges. I had chosen to become a stronger version of myself. In the darkest moments of discovering Maya's betrayal, I had feared I might lose myself completely, my identity, my stability, my sense of who I was. Instead, I had found layers of strength I never knew I possessed. I had discovered that even when everything external was stripped away, the core of who I was remained unbreakable. That knowledge, that self-knowledge, was something no one could ever steal. 1 year after Maya's sentencing, I stood at the podium in a university lecture hall, facing a room of attentive students and professionals. The sign behind me read, Identity Theft Prevention Summit, Personal Security in the Digital Age. Identity isn't just data, I began, my voice steady and confident. It's not just your social security number, your credit history, or your online accounts. Identity is the story of who you are, the accumulation of your choices, your relationships, your expertise, and your character. And when someone steals your identity, they're not just taking your financial resources. They're attempting to hijack your narrative. The audience leaned forward, captivated. My story had become somewhat famous in cybersecurity and identity protection circles, not just for its dramatic twin element, but for the methodical way I'd documented, fought, and reclaimed what was mine. What many people don't realize until they've experienced it is that identity theft is an ongoing battle, not a single event, I continued. Recovery doesn't happen overnight. It's a process of reclaiming pieces of yourself, often in a different order than they were taken. I clicked to the next slide, which outlined my recovery hierarchy. The systematic approach I'd developed during my own restoration process and had since refined into a framework that was being adopted by victim advocacy groups nationwide. First, secure your basic needs and safety. Then address your financial security and legal standing. Only after those foundations are stabilized should you tackle the more complex aspects of repairing your reputation and rebuilding relationships affected by the theft. As I guided the audience through each stage of identity recovery, I reflected on my own journey through this hierarchy. The past year had been one of disciplined rebuilding, setting boundaries, and discovering new strengths I never knew I possessed. After the lecture concluded and the last questions were answered, a woman approached me privately. Her hands fidgeted with the strap of her purse, her eyes darting nervously. My ex-husband stole my identity 3 years ago, she confided. I've been too ashamed to fight back properly. Everyone says I should have been more careful, that I should have known better than to trust him with my passwords and documents. She took a shaky breath. But listening to you today, you've made me realize that my shame is misplaced. He committed the crime, not me. I recognized in her the same misplaced guilt I'd initially felt. The irrational but powerful feeling that being victimized was somehow our own fault. It was a perspective I'd worked hard to overcome in myself, and now helped others confront. The person who commits fraud is the one who should feel ashamed, I told her firmly. Not the person who trusted someone they had every reason to trust. Betrayal of that trust is on them, never on you. Relief washed over her face. How do I start? It feels so overwhelming. I reached into my bag and handed her a business card. Call my office tomorrow. We have resources, support groups, and step-by-step guides. You don't have to do this alone. This was my new purpose, the unexpected silver lining that had emerged from Maya's devastating betrayal. I'd transformed my meticulous documentation and strategic recovery process into Identity Reclaimed, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping identity theft victims rebuild their lives. What had begun as a small consultancy operating out of my home office had grown into a recognized leader in the field, with a dedicated staff of legal advisors, financial counselors, cybersecurity experts, and peer support coordinators. We provided both practical assistance and emotional support, recognizing that identity theft wounds extended far beyond financial statements. As I packed up my presentation materials, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel, whose law firm had become Identity Reclaimed's legal partner. Dinner still on for tonight? Reservations at 7. Our professional relationship had gradually evolved into something more personal over the past 6 months. What started as strategy meetings and case discussions had slowly transformed into coffee dates and dinner conversations that extended long past the point where we'd exhausted work topics. Daniel's analytical mind complemented my methodical nature, and his quiet support during my darkest moments had revealed a steadfastness I deeply valued. I texted back a confirmation, feeling a flutter of anticipation. The simple pleasure of looking forward to an evening with someone who genuinely understood and respected me, was another piece of my life I'd reclaimed and rebuilt, stronger than before. Later that evening, as we lingered over dessert, at our favorite restaurant, Daniel brought up the subject we'd been carefully navigating for weeks. The Phoenix office has officially approved opening the satellite location in Denver, he said, watching my reaction closely. They want me to head it up. It's a 2-year minimum commitment. My fork paused midway to my mouth. Congratulations. That's a huge opportunity. It is, he agreed. But it also means decisions about us. He reached across the table, his fingers lightly touching mine. I know we haven't put labels on this yet, and I respect your caution after everything you've been through. But I need to know if there's a future here worth exploring, even if it means figuring out some logistical challenges. 6 months ago, this conversation would have sent me retreating behind careful walls of self-protection. Now, I found myself considering possibilities rather than cataloging risks. I've been offered a position with the National Center for Identity Theft Victims, I said carefully. Their headquarters is in Boulder, about 30 minutes from Denver. Daniel's eyes widened slightly. You didn't mention that. I just received the formal offer yesterday. They want me to develop training programs for victim advocates nationwide. I took a deep breath. I've been hesitant to make any major changes after finally rebuilding stability here. But sometimes the right opportunity arrives at an unexpected moment. And this is the right opportunity? I considered the question seriously. The work aligns perfectly with my mission. The organization has resources I could only dream of accessing independently. And I met his gaze directly. The location would make exploring a future together considerably more practical. The smile that spread across his face told me everything I needed to know about his feelings on the matter. 2 months later, I stood in my empty Phoenix house, conducting a final walkthrough before the new owners took possession. Each room held memories, both of the life I'd rebuilt after Maya's betrayal, and of the determination that had carried me through that dark period. In the home office, where I'd first conceived Identity Reclaimed, I paused to reflect on how far I'd come. The raw, wounded person who had returned from Tokyo to find her life stolen had transformed into someone stronger, more resilient, and paradoxically, more open to connection despite the betrayal she'd experienced. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The screen displayed Phoenix Correctional Facility. Maya. Our communication over the past year had been minimal and strictly controlled. I'd permitted monthly letters, initially to monitor for any signs of continued manipulation, later because I recognized that complete severance wouldn't facilitate my own healing process. I needed to confront the relationship rather than simply excise it. Her letters had evolved from defensive justifications to grudging acknowledgments of wrongdoing, and finally, to what seemed like genuine reflection. Whether this represented true growth or another calculated performance remained uncertain, but I'd established enough emotional distance to engage without being endangered. Phone calls, however, were new territory. I answered cautiously. Hello? Sophia. Maya's voice, so similar to my own yet distinctly different in its cadence and tone, came through clearly. They told me you approved the call. I did, I confirmed, keeping my voice neutral. What do you want, Maya? I heard you're moving to Colorado, she said. My counselor thought. She suggested I should wish you well directly, not just in a letter. I leaned against the empty desk, processing this development. Yes, I've accepted a position there. That's good. You deserve good things. Goodbye. Line went quiet for a moment before she continued. I've been doing a lot of work here. Therapy, group sessions. They have this intensive program for people with… She hesitated. Personality issues like mine. I'm glad you're getting… help, I said, meaning it despite my reservations. They have me keeping this journal where I have to write down every time I feel the urge to manipulate a situation or twist the truth. Then I have to write out how my actions would affect others. She gave a hollow laugh. It's a lot of writing. Despite everything, I felt a flicker of compassion. Maya had caused tremendous damage, but she was also damaged herself, shaped by the same family dynamics that had influenced me, but responding in drastically different ways. The therapist says I developed this pattern of behavior because I always felt inferior to you, she continued, that I was trying to prove I could be you, could even be a better you, instead of figuring out who I actually am. The insight surprised me. And what do you think? I think she's partly right, but it's more complicated than that. Maya's voice softened. I was always jealous of how sure you were of yourself, of your path. Even when everyone was telling you to be more like me, more outgoing, more spontaneous, you stayed true to who you were. I never had that kind of certainty. It was perhaps the most honest thing Maya had ever said to me. For the first time, I glimpsed the insecurity beneath her bravado, the painful counterpart to my own struggles with feeling overlooked and undervalued. Maya, I said carefully, what happened between us can't be undone. The damage you caused was real and substantial. I've rebuilt my life, but I'll never forget what it felt like to be erased by my own sister. I know, she said quietly. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I wanted you to know that I understand now what I did to you. Really understand. And I'm sorry. Not because saying it will fix anything, but because it's true. We spoke for a few minutes more, about her progress in the rehabilitation programs, about the support groups I'd established, about our parents' ongoing struggle to come to terms with what had happened. The conversation was careful, measured, without the emotional drama that had characterized so many of our interactions growing up. Before we ended the call, Maya asked a question that caught me off guard. Do you think we'll ever talk again? After I get out? I considered this seriously, honoring the progress toward honesty we seem to be making. I don't know, Maya. That depends on a lot of factors, including the choices you make from here forward. I'm not closing that door completely, but I'm also not making promises I'm not sure I can keep. That's fair, she acknowledged. More than fair, actually. After hanging up, I stood in the empty room, processing the conversation. There was a time when any interaction with Maya would have left me emotionally drained, constantly analyzing for manipulation or hidden agendas. Now, I felt surprisingly steady, able to engage without being destabilized, to acknowledge complexity, without excusing harm. It was another measure of how far I'd come. The following day, I pulled into the driveway of my parents' home for a final visit before my move. Our relationship had undergone its own careful reconstruction over the past year, not returning to what it had been, but evolving into something more honest and balanced. My mother opened the door before I could knock, enveloping me in a tight hug. We've got everything ready for lunch, she said, leading me inside. Dad's finishing up the grill now. The house smelled of familiar spices and charcoal smoke. En bien. The dining room table sat several photo albums I recognized from childhood, neatly stacked beside a cardboard box. What's all this? I asked, gesturing toward the collection. My father appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. We've been doing some organizing, he explained. Found some things we thought you might want to take with you to Colorado. I opened the top album to find it filled with photographs I'd never seen before. Myself at science competitions, receiving academic awards at my college graduation. Moments of achievement that had gone uncelebrated or under-acknowledged at the time. "We didn't always see you clearly," my mother said softly, watching my reaction. "We were so caught up in managing Maya's challenges that we often took your stability for granted." "It wasn't fair," my father added. "And while we can't change the past, we wanted you to know that we see you now. We recognize your strength and your accomplishments." I turned the pages slowly, absorbing this visual record of a life that had unfolded quietly alongside the more dramatic narrative of Maya's exploits. It was a bittersweet realization that my parents had documented these moments even as they'd failed to properly acknowledge them. "There's something else," my mother said, reaching for the box. "Something we should have given you long ago." Inside was a collection of letters and cards. Dozens of them, some in faded envelopes, others simply folded sheets of paper. I recognized my grandmother's handwriting on several. "Your grandmother saw you," my mother explained, "in ways we sometimes didn't. She kept every letter you wrote to her, every card. Before she died, she gave them to me with instructions to return them to you when you were ready to understand their value." I opened one letter from my 14-year-old self, describing in detail a science project on water purification methods. My grandmother had written a response on the back, praising not just my intelligence but my persistence, my thoroughness, my unwillingness to take shortcuts. "You have a rare gift, Sophia," she'd written. "You see the whole picture where others see only parts. Never let anyone convince you that thoroughness is a flaw rather than a strength. The world needs builders like you, not just dreamers." Tears filled my eyes as I realized what my grandmother had recognized so long ago. The very qualities that Maya had mocked, and my parents had sometimes overlooked, were actually my greatest assets. The same methodical nature that had enabled me to dismantle Maya's deception and rebuild my life had been present all along, waiting to be fully embraced. "We should have helped you see your own value sooner," my father said, his voice thick with emotion. "Instead of always asking you to be more like your sister." "And we should have set better boundaries for Maya," my mother added, "instead of making excuses for her behavior." "Maybe if we had." I reached for their hands. "We can't rewrite the past, but we can learn from it." Over lunch, we talked about my new position in Colorado, about Daniel, about the identity protection workshops I'd be developing. For the first time in our family's history, the conversation centered on my journey rather than Maya's drama or needs, not from resentment or score settling, but from a healthier balance that had been long overdue. As I prepared to leave, my mother pressed a small velvet pouch into my hand. "This was your grandmother's. She wanted you to have it when you found your path." Inside was a silver compass pendant on a delicate chain. Engraved on the back were the words, "Trust your own direction." "It's perfect," I whispered, fastening it around my neck. "Thank you." The drive back to my temporary apartment gave me time to reflect on these final pieces of closure. My relationship with my parents would continue to evolve, likely with occasional setbacks and old patterns re-emerging. But fundamental shifts had occurred in how they saw me, in how I established boundaries, and in our shared understanding of the family dynamics that had shaped us all. That evening, as I finished packing the last of my belongings for the move to Colorado, I found myself drawn to the small wooden box where I kept my most important documents. Among them was the journal I'd started upon returning from Tokyo, a detailed record of Maya's theft and my subsequent journey to reclaim my identity. I opened it to the first page, where I'd written in a shaky hand, "Recovery Strategy, Phase 1, Documentation." The meticulous plans that followed had been my roadmap through the darkest period of my life. Flipping through the pages, I traced my evolution from shocked victim to strategic fighter to empowered rebuilder. The later entries reflected not just practical steps, but deeper insights about identity, trust, and resilience. On the final written page, dated 6 months earlier, I'd concluded, "Identity theft takes away your past. Recovery gives you back your future." Now, I picked up a pen and added a new entry. 1 year later, I understand that what Maya stole was never the essence of who I am. She took the external markers of my identity, my financial accounts, my apartment, my relationship. But she couldn't take my character, my values, or my unique way of engaging with the world. The very qualities she mocked, my thoroughness, my patience, my attention to detail, became the tools that enabled me to rebuild after her betrayal. What she saw as weaknesses were actually my greatest strengths. The journey of reclaiming my identity became a process of discovering who I truly am beneath the external markers. In losing everything, I found something invaluable, the unshakable core of myself that no one can steal or replicate. Tomorrow, I begin a new chapter in Colorado, not running from the past, but carrying forward the wisdom it has given me. I move forward not despite what happened, but because of it. Stronger, clearer, more authentically myself than I've ever been. I closed the journal and placed it in my carry-on bag. Unlike most of my possessions, which would follow in the moving truck, this record of my journey would travel with me, not as a burden of painful memories, but as a testament to human resilience and the power of methodical persistence in the face of devastating betrayal. The next morning, I stood in the empty apartment, keys in hand, ready to leave Phoenix behind. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Safe travels. Looking forward to building something new together." I smiled, touching the compass pendant at my throat. Trust your own direction. After a lifetime of being told to be more like someone else, I had finally embraced the power of being fully, unapologetically myself. Maya had stolen my identity, thinking she could become me. Instead, she had inadvertently set me on a path to discover my authentic self, a self stronger and more resilient than either of us could have imagined. As I stepped outside into the clear desert morning, I felt not the closure of a door, but the opening of a horizon. The painful chapter that had begun with Maya's betrayal was ending, but the story of who I was becoming continued to unfold, page by page, choice by choice, each step forward more confidently my own. 5 years after moving to Colorado, I stood at the podium in a grand ballroom filled with government officials, tech industry leaders, and advocates. The projected screen behind me displayed the presidential seal alongside the words, "National Identity Protection Act Signing Ceremony." When my own twin sister stole my identity, I began, I discovered that our legal system wasn't equipped to address the full spectrum of harm that identity theft causes. Financial institutions had protocols for fraudulent transactions. Credit bureaus had processes for disputing accounts. But no one was addressing the profound psychological and emotional trauma of having your very selfhood hijacked, of watching someone else live your life while yours crumbled. I paused, looking out at the sea of attentive faces. In the front row sat Daniel, now my husband of 3 years, alongside our colleagues from Identity Reclaimed, which had grown from a small nonprofit into a national organization with offices in 12 cities. The legislation being signed today changes that, I continued. For the first time, identity theft victims will have access to comprehensive support services, not just to repair their credit, but to rebuild their sense of security and selfhood. The law establishes a national recovery framework that treats identity theft as the complex, multidimensional crime that it is. The journey to this moment had been anything but straightforward. After establishing our Denver operations, I'd been invited to testify before a congressional committee on identity theft protections. What was supposed to be a one-time appearance evolved into ongoing consultation, then formal policy recommendations, and eventually drafting portions of the very legislation now awaiting the president's signature. This law won't just help victims recover, I emphasized. It will prevent countless thefts through enhanced security standards and education initiatives. We're not just offering bandages after the wound, we're building stronger armor to prevent the injury in the first place. As I concluded my remarks and stepped away from the podium, I caught sight of an unexpected face in the audience. Near the back of the room, seated beside my parents, was Maya. Her presence wasn't entirely surprising. She had been released from prison 2 years earlier after serving her full sentence and completing extensive rehabilitation programs. What was surprising was seeing her here, at what represented the culmination of my work, transforming personal trauma into systemic change. She looked different, more subdued, her once flashy style replaced by simple elegance. Our eyes met briefly, across the crowded room, and she offered a small, hesitant nod. I returned it before taking my seat for the president's address and the ceremonial signing. Later, at the reception, Maya approached cautiously, maintaining a respectful distance. "That was an incredible speech," she said. "Congratulations, Sophia. This legislation will help so many people." "Thank you," I replied, studying her. The physical resemblance between us remained striking, but there was a fundamental shift in her demeanor, a groundedness that had replaced her former performative charm. "Mom and Dad invited me," she explained, answering my unasked question. They thought it might be healing for all of us to see where this journey has led you, to witness something positive emerging from what I did." I nodded, appreciating her directness. In the 3 years since her release, our contact had been limited and carefully structured. Occasional family gatherings with clear boundaries, brief conversations at holiday dinners. Not reconciliation exactly, but a careful navigation of shared space that acknowledged both the harm done and the biological connection that remained. "Your work with the rehabilitation program? It's going well?" I asked, genuinely interested in her progress. After her release, Maya had surprised everyone by training to become a peer counselor for former inmates transitioning back to society. She'd specifically requested assignment to cases involving fraud and identity theft, using her first-hand understanding of the mindset that led to such crimes. "It is," she confirmed. "It's challenging, but fulfilling in a way I never experienced before, helping people face the consequences of their actions while finding a path forward. It's given me purpose." Before I could respond, Daniel appeared. At my side, a supportive presence, but not an intrusive one. He nodded politely to Maya. "The president is asking for you," he told me quietly. "They want to capture some photographs with the key advocates behind the legislation." I excused myself, promising to find Maya again before the event concluded. As I walked away, I reflected on the strange symmetry of our lives, how we had both, in wildly different ways, ended up working with identity issues. I helping victims recover, she helping perpetrators reform. The remainder of the reception passed in a blur of congratulations, strategic conversations, and planning discussions for implementation of the new law. By the time I had a moment to breathe, Maya had already departed, leaving a small gift bag with my parents to give to me. Inside was a handcrafted journal with a note, "For the next chapter of your story, with admiration for who you've become, M." The gesture was meaningful not because it erased the past, but because it acknowledged the present. My transformation of personal pain into purposeful action, and perhaps, in her own way, hers as well. That night, back in our hotel suite, Daniel and I celebrated privately with champagne on the balcony overlooking the Washington Monument illuminated against the night sky. "To the newest federal policy advisor," he toasted, clinking his glass against mine. "Though I still think identity recovery czar has a better ring to it." I laughed, leaning against his shoulder. "I'm not taking a government position. The consulting role is more than enough alongside my work with the foundation." Speaking of the foundation, Daniel said, setting down his glass. The board approved the expansion proposal. We're cleared to open 3 new recovery centers next year. The news sent a wave of satisfaction through me. What had begun as my personal mission to help others reclaim their identities after theft had evolved into a comprehensive support network with services ranging from immediate crisis intervention to long-term psychological counseling. That's perfect timing with the new funding provisions in the legislation, I noted. We'll be positioned to help implement the national framework we helped create. Daniel smiled, studying my face in the moonlight. You know, most people would have been destroyed by what happened to you. They would have remained victims, defined by their trauma. Instead, you've built something extraordinary from it. I had help, I reminded him, squeezing his hand. You, Harriet, the team we've built. No one recovers in isolation. True. But it started with your vision. Your refusal to simply patch up your own life and move on. You saw the bigger picture when most people would have been focused solely on personal survival. His observation touched on something I'd been reflecting on throughout the day, how the methodical, detail-oriented nature that had once made me feel like the boring twin had ultimately enabled me to transform individual recovery into systemic change. I think I finally understand what my grandmother meant, I said, touching the compass pendant I still wore daily. About seeing the whole picture where others see only parts. It's not just about being thorough or careful. It's about recognizing patterns and connections, about understanding how individual experiences fit into larger systems. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. And that's exactly why your approach to identity recovery has been so revolutionary. You didn't just address the financial aspects or the legal aspects or the emotional aspects. You recognize that identity itself is multidimensional, and recovery needs to be equally comprehensive. We fell into comfortable silence watching the city lights below. After a moment, Daniel asked gently, "How was it, seeing Maya today?" I considered the question carefully. Surreal, but also clarifying in a way. Seeing her there, witnessing what her actions ultimately led to, not just my personal recovery, but this legislation that will help thousands of people. It felt like the closing of a circle. Do you think you'll ever fully reconcile? I don't know if reconcile is the right word, I admitted. We'll never have the kind of sisterly relationship people expect from twins. Too much has happened. But I think we've both found a way to acknowledge our connection without being defined by it, to recognize each other's humanity without erasing the past. Daniel nodded, understanding the nuance. And that's its own kind of healing. The next morning brought a flurry of media interviews about the legislation, followed by a strategy session with the implementation task force. By afternoon, we were on a flight back to Denver, where our real lives awaited beyond the momentary spotlight. As the plane reached cruising altitude, I opened my laptop to review the upcoming week's schedule. A notification popped up from our foundation's secure messaging system, a new case referral with an urgent classification. The details made my heart sink. A young woman whose abusive ex-partner had systematically stolen her identity, destroyed her credit, impersonated her online, and alienated her from family and friends through elaborate deceptions. The situation had escalated to the point where she'd had to flee her home state and was now living in temporary housing, afraid to use her real name or access any of her accounts. It was one of the most comprehensive identity theft cases I'd seen. Not just financial fraud, but a complete assault on the victim's sense of self and safety. The kind of case that had driven me to create Identity Reclaimed in the first place. I'd like to handle this one personally, I told Daniel, showing him the file. He raised an eyebrow. You haven't taken a direct case in over a year. The policy team needs you focused on implementation guidelines for the new legislation. I know, I acknowledged. But there's something about this case. I think I need to remember what this work looks like on the ground, not just from the policy level. Plus, she's here in Denver. I can work with her directly without disrupting the Washington schedule. Daniel studied the file, then nodded. I understand. Just be careful about overcommitting. Even Sophia Rivers can't be in two places at once. The irony of his statement, given my history with Maya's impersonation, made us both smile. But his point was valid. In building the organization and advocating for legislative change, I'd gradually moved away from direct client work. There was value in reconnecting with the core purpose that had started it all. The following Monday, I met with Jessica Chen in a private consultation room at our Denver Recovery Center. She was younger than I'd expected, barely 23, with a wary expression and hands that couldn't quite stay still. Her gaze darted around the room, assessing exits and potential threats, the hypervigilance of someone whose trust had been systematically destroyed. "Thank you for meeting with me," I began, keeping my voice calm and steady. "I've reviewed your case file, but I'd like to hear directly from you what you're experiencing." Jessica hesitated, studying me with the careful assessment of someone who had learned the hard way not to take people at face value. "Why are you handling this personally? Isn't that unusual?" Her directness was refreshing. "It is," I acknowledged. "But your situation resonated with me. Before I founded this organization, I experienced a comprehensive identity theft that went beyond finances into a complete life takeover. My twin sister assumed my identity while I was studying abroad and systematically replaced me in my own life." Something in Jessica's expression shifted. Not quite trust yet, but a flicker of recognition. "How did you get through it? Because right now, I can't imagine ever feeling normal again." "Not by pretending it didn't happen," I told her honestly, "and not by trying to simply restore what was there before. Recovery isn't about returning to your previous state. It's about building something new, something stronger and more resilient because it's been tested." Over the next 2 hours, Jessica shared her story in halting segments, how her ex-partner had gradually isolated her, gained access to her accounts, and then, when she tried to leave him, launched a devastating campaign to destroy not just her financial stability, but her very sense of self. "He was meticulous," she explained, a tremor in her voice. "He'd planned for contingencies I wouldn't even think of, and he was so convincing when he impersonated me. My own mother believed his emails were from me." The parallels to my experience with Maya were striking, though the context and relationship were different. The methodical erasure, the careful manipulation of mutual connections, the exploitation of trust, the patterns of identity theft as a form of control and erasure remained consistent across different scenarios. "The most terrifying part," Jessica continued, "is that I don't know where it ends. How do I rebuild when I don't know what else he's done in my name? When I don't know who still believes his version of me instead of the real me?" I recognized the existential uncertainty in her questions, the same questions that had haunted me during my early recovery. Not just, what has been taken, but who am I now that this has happened? "The first step is comprehensive documentation," I explained, outlining the approach that had been my lifeline. "We need to establish a clear timeline of what happened, when, and how. Not just for legal purposes, but to reclaim your narrative, to distinguish between what was done to you and who you actually are." Jessica nodded slowly. "That makes sense. But how do I ever trust anyone again? How do I stop seeing potential? Threats everywhere?" It was the question that cut to the heart of identity theft's deeper damage, the way it fractured not just financial security, but the fundamental trust that allowed human connection. "Trust after betrayal isn't restored overnight," I told her. "It's rebuilt incrementally, with boundaries and discernment. You learn to trust your own judgment again first, Then extend that trust selectively to others who prove worthy of it through consistent actions, not just words. By the end of our session, we had established the framework for her recovery plan, a comprehensive approach addressing immediate security concerns, legal interventions, financial restoration, and psychological support. Jessica left with something she hadn't arrived with, a structured pathway forward and the beginning of hope. As I watched her leave, shoulders a little straighter, steps a little more purposeful, I was reminded of why I'd created identity, reclaimed in the first place. Policy change was crucial, but the heart of our work remained these individual transformations, helping people reclaim not just their practical identity markers, but their sense of agency and selfhood. Over the following months, I maintained regular contact with Jessica while balancing the demands of implementing the new legislation. Her case progressed steadily, securing protective orders, disputing fraudulent accounts, rebuilding credit history, and gradually re-establishing connections with family members who had been manipulated by her ex. 6 months into her recovery process, Jessica asked to join our peer support training program, expressing interest in eventually helping others who had experienced similar violations. It was a transition I'd seen before. The moment when a victim began to reconceptualize their experience, not just as trauma to overcome, but as insight that could benefit others. "Are you sure you're ready?" I asked her during our check-in meeting. The training can be emotionally demanding, especially when your own recovery is still in process. Jessica considered this thoughtfully. "I don't think recovery ever really ends," she observed. "It evolves. Right now, using what I've learned to help someone else feels like the next step in my own healing." Her insight resonated deeply with my own journey, how my individual recovery had naturally expanded into advocacy, then organization building, then policy change. Each stage had been part of integrating the experience, transforming it from something that had happened to me into something I was actively shaping and deriving meaning from. "In that case," I said, "I think you'll make an excellent peer advocate." That evening, as I updated Jessica's file with notes from our meeting, Daniel found me still working in my home office well past dinner time. "Still thinking about the Chen case?" he asked, setting a cup of tea beside my laptop. I nodded, leaning back in my chair. "She's making remarkable progress. It's reminded me why we started this work, what it looks like when someone reclaims not just their practical identity, but their sense of who they are and what they're capable of." Daniel smiled knowingly. "You've been different since taking her case, more energized, more connected to the work." I didn't realize how much I'd missed the direct impact, I admitted. The policy work is important, but there's something powerful about witnessing transformation up close. "So, what are you thinking?" he asked, recognizing the contemplative look that typically preceded a new direction or initiative. I gestured toward my notes. "I'm thinking about balance, about how to maintain connection to individual cases while continuing the systemic work. Maybe a structured mentorship program where I work directly with a few high-complexity cases each year, specifically focusing on those who want to transition into advocacy." "Creating a pipeline of lived experience leaders," Daniel nodded. "That makes sense. It keeps you grounded in the direct work while simultaneously building the next generation of advocates." As we discussed the logistics of implementing such a program, I reflected on how far I'd come from those desperate days in Tokyo when I'd first discovered Maya's betrayal. What had begun as a personal catastrophe had evolved into a mission that had helped thousands of people reclaim their identities and reshape national policy. Yet the most profound transformation hadn't been external at all. It had been internal, the evolution from seeing myself as defined by what happened to me, to recognizing my power to shape what happened next, not just for myself, but for others facing similar violations. The following weekend, during a rare day off, Daniel and I hiked one of our favorite trails in the Rocky Mountain National Park. The autumn air was crisp, the aspen leaves shimmering gold against the evergreen backdrop, At the summit overlook, we paused to take in the panoramic view of peaks stretching toward the horizon. 5 years ago, when we were just starting to date, you told me you weren't sure if you'd ever fully trust anyone again, Daniel remarked, his arm around my shoulders. Do you remember that? I nodded, recalling the conversation. One of many careful, honest discussions about the impact of Maya's betrayal on my capacity for vulnerability and connection. What would you say now? He asked. About trust. About recovery. About who you've become through all of this. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.